Well, alrighty then. Hello, people out there in internet lands. I'm just a touch late today because, oh man, did I have a lot of trouble with the ATEM Mini. I gotta say, I love the quality of Blackmagic, but the software and ability to handle what's possibly cable issues is terrifying. I never know whether things are going to work or whether they're going to be catastrophically wrong. But that's just maybe, here we are. I have a coding day to do, which I can do until about 1 or so. And we're going to get rolling on that, and I'll talk about a variety of things. Firstly, let me fire up chat window, as I like to do. And I'm going to see about fooling with some things. Let me switch this over to laptop so I can do my thing of making things on my computer screen stop moving and grabbing my eye so that I look at them all the time. Otherwise, I'll be looking like this all day. And so I'm going to pause that and go back, and I don't know if other people have as much trouble as I am with the simple task of making all of this stuff work, but I feel like, you know, if I'm going to be struggling with it like that, I might as well share that fact. And I have a plan in mind today. Actually, I have a whole bunch of plans in mind. That's what I've been doing lately, is thinking of various things. But my plan in mind today is that I don't think I'm quite done with my reverb explorations. I kind of feel like I can go deeper, because I've made the reverb that I did. The thing is, seeing as it's designed around Bricasti concepts and Casey's advice, Casey's the one that says, don't use pitch shift on reverbs. It is unnatural. And so Verbity that it has put out, which I hope is going to work well for people, has the pitch shifty stuff removed. And I feel like there's probably some good things about that. I'm keeping an eye on my wood stove, don't mind me. Oh, hey, look, I have another camera angle. Check that out. Many things I put together. I don't know why I've got a like when nobody has even said hello, but cool. Ah, there's somebody saying hello. Visions from GNZ11. Here's the deal. I've just done a video called Verbity, a plugin called Verbity, which I can fire up on my laptop and get into coding more in my usual way. But it strips out all of the pitch bend stuff that existed in the other reverbs. Now, when I was doing hardware stuff, what was going on with the hardware stuff was I was running either a MIDI verb, original MIDI verb, or a pair of MIDI verbs running into each other, because I enjoy like Galactic Space ultra depth reverb. And one of the things I did with it to get to that place, in particular if I was doing the two MIDI verbs running into each other, what I would do is run them through a Delta Labs effect run. Oh, you're going to try out the new Reverb plugin tomorrow? Cool, hope you like it. And the Delta Labs Effectron was not only a serviceable pre-delay and something that you could put echoes in. You could make it space stuff out more by having it be literally echoing. But you could also make it pitch bend. And the Effectron pitch bends really well because it's actually changing the sampling rate in order to do it. And I found that if I was going for incredibly deep reverb spaces, oh no, I gotta love the Alesis MIDI verbs, even though I've been kind of replacing them. Like what I'm doing with the current reverb basically beats what I had with any of the MIDI verbs, including even the Generation 1 MIDI verb. The new thing I'm working on, or that I just put out, is better. But before that, and during like my hardware work, and for any techno explorations I get into that are based on hardware and like using the Mackie mixer that I could do with studying a little bit more, I was using this delay to do a vibrato on everything that went into the reverb, and it did wonders as far as making everything sound huger and deeper. Now, the new reverb that I made, I stripped out all of the pitch bend stuff, and I also stripped out the pre-delay, and everything just runs on the feed-forward networks. Hey, Lorenzo. But that doesn't mean I couldn't put a pre-delay in entirely for the, because there's another thing going on with the new reverb that I know could, it'll work for some people and not work for others. And that is, it doesn't have the stereo spreading that the earlier reverbs that I did with less of a nice of a tone, it doesn't have the stereo spreading that those had, because it doesn't have banks upon banks of everything running its own little vibrato, its own little pitch bend, where all of those pitch bends were different across different channels. What's my favorite reverb plugin? This most recent one, or maybe the one that I'm coding today. Because that's what I'm here for. I had an idea that fixes all of those problems at once, and I'm fairly enthusiastic about giving it a shot. Namely, it's fairly easy for me to throw in a pre-delay set of delay taps and to take the stereo version of Verbity from the VST version that I made and just adapt that back into the AU again. That gives me a stereo feed. That means a number of things. One of the things it means is I can have the feedback element feedback across channels rather than just directly. So the feed-forward tanks are going to still be confined within channels and not have crossover, but then the additional regeneration will bounce, sort of ping-pong back and forth, and that will fill stuff in rather than having it be strictly dual mono as Verbity is. But the other thing is, if I'm going to run these pre-delays, I can take that, the pre-echo thing, and not use it so much as an echo, but as a source for making vibrato. And I can do a quadrature vibrato. What that means is it's basically on a sine wave pitch shift, but rather than doing two independent pitch shifts, I will do a single, basically a single LFO, a single oscillator. And then left is going to be that directly, and right is going to be that about 90 degrees out of phase. What that's going to do is, it can happen quite slowly. It can be a small amount of reverb over a fairly large space of time. The exact delay times will rarely be exactly the same instant. So if you have center channel stuff going into what's meant to be the giant, enormously Titanic reverb, the center stuff is going to have slight timing offsets going into the reverb, so that'll be an interesting effect that will still be in both channels, but it'll have a kind of a stereoization thing going on. But also, it's rare that, in fact, I'm not sure there would be any instant where both of the channels would have exactly the same pitch shift level because it's quadrature. It'll be slightly offset. This is something that I was thinking about because somebody asked me to do essentially a auto pan, and it occurred to me like, well, I could do that. That doesn't sound terribly interesting. But what if I did an auto pan where you had, an offset quadrature setup so that it could be just back and forth, or it could be a tremolo effect, but it also could be a slightly offset effect, meaning that the auto pan would be like a circle. It would be like zooming to the side and then forwards as loud as possible and then off to the side and quieter again, rather than simply a back and forth motion. And that sounds much more interesting. So I got asked for that. I haven't done it, but I put the idea of quadrature pitch offset in my head, and that is exactly the kind of thing that will make what is already, I'm thinking of maybe putting in a fine-tune control where I can get closer to that infinite reverb thing, because it's been tricky getting the Verbity is a touchy little algorithm, and especially that I've set a tiny thunder boost in there. I might actually have to remove that to get it working properly, because otherwise the feedback qualities will be excessive. I'm thinking about increasing the amount of possible feedback as well as making it a stereo crossfeed. But anyway, the idea here is I should be able to have this working in such a way where I'll still have the tone of the Verbity algorithm, the feed-forward algorithms, but at the same time, I should be like in the Verbity product post. Towards the end of it, I was playing a Alpha Juno. One of the things I've been doing is continuing to work on the studio so that I can do stuff like that. I'm also going to have to get some kind of little extension cable for the headphones I was using, because those in-ear headphones and stuff, the cable is like 2 inches long. So I could reach out to the keyboard and be playing the thing that's feeding the Alpha Juno. I should point out the Alpha Juno, that is a classic Roland analog keyboard, but it is an Alpha Juno 1. So I strongly recommend those as far as getting a classic analog keyboard. It's certainly going to be a lot less than like a Juno 60 or whatever, because it's underrated. These Alpha Junos are underrated. But the thing about the Juno 1 is that its keyboard is smaller. Maybe you can even see it a little bit in the background. It's the one to the side of the modular. I'm not sure whether it's showing up, but the keyboard is smaller, and the keyboard is neither pressure nor velocity sensitive, even though the synth is. So Alpha Juno 1 is kind of a hilarious synthesizer, but a real find if you have some auxiliary stuff to work with. And it could be as simple as the Arturia key step, which I have sitting on top of things there. That'll send velocity and pressure. But I also have this giant old Kurzweil dinosaur. Like here, it's a Kurzweil K2600. Enormous, heavy, ancient Rompler thing. And I've done some work on it to try to sort of make it better. Like it's got a SSD drive instead of the loudly whining hard drive, and I went and I got a quieter fan for it. Otherwise, it sounds like a blender. And the thing about it is more than capable of velocity sensitivity across pretty much a full-size keyboard. And it sends good pressure sensitivity as well. So when I play on the Alpha Juno, I'm not using its keyboard for either of the ones that I've got because I got a backup. Instead, the one is driven off of a guitar, the Sonus G2M specifically, the guitar to MIDI converter, and it's basically a lead synthesizer, and then the other one's being driven off of the Kurzweil. And the reason I'm mentioning all of that is that I was running synthesizer tones, like classic analog synth tones, into Verbity for the end of the video that I made. And it was nice playing live into a video. I've put a lot of work into getting things so that I don't have to just sit there playing the same piece of audio that I've been playing for 2 years. And the other thing about it is, since it had no pitch shift, if I had the synthesizer set to like practically a pipe organ, there's no vibrato in it or anything like that, you really got that sense of a static reverberant setting. And hitting sustained notes, or if I send test tones into it or something like that, there would be that completely static reverberant setting. And that's somewhat lacking as far as certain effects. As far as realism, it's quite good. I think it worked out fairly well, and it did seem quite plausible, quite realistic. But what if you were doing ambient space music? Oh, 61 key with Aftertouch? I don't know. I have not tried Native Instruments. You could go and find an old Kurzweil like I did. You can probably buy one of those for $50, and then you're going to have to spend another $100 on a trucking company to carry it home for you because it weighs 3,000 pounds. Not really 3,000 pounds. Also, you can go with Arturia. Behringer is beating up on Arturia these days, so might be worth the support, although some of software support and pushing the limits of Arturia stuff can be somewhat questionable. Using it just as a straight-up driver controller, I've not had any issues with the key step that I've got. But when I was trying to run several of them and have one of them be sending MIDI controls to reset the transpose for the other ones, which I had a whole pile of little key steps, which I ended up selling at a local music store. But I had a pile of little key steps way back in the day, all hooked up on this elaborate stand, and the idea was I was going to run one as this slower sequence, and it was going to transpose the other ones, and then I was going to have other sequences going on those ones to make a larger, more complicated, more generative kind of thing. Trouble is, it didn't really work. It should have worked, but it didn't really work. So pushing the limits of what the Arturia ones can do doesn't always deliver. But again, Behringer is beating up on them with that Behringer Crave thing, so you might want to think about seeing whether there's a 61-key Arturia controller with Aftertouch somewhere. I have certainly found that the itty-bitty key step is acceptable as far as being a little bitty controller with Aftertouch and such. And again, you might want to look into used stuff, older things. Ismail, well, thank you. I am maybe a little bit stressed out because I was struggling with the Blackmagic hardware again this morning. Namely, everything else is still working fine. The cameras are still working fine. I'm happy with the, I got lenses for the cameras that are a bit of an upgrade, which I'll be happy to tell you which ones I chose. At some point, I'm going to have to go to my upcoming hardware hacking website, because I have one of those. I'm not telling you what it is yet, but I'm going to be setting that up with information for how you can, let me see. If you hear me rattling, it's because I'm doing something. Build stuff like this out of rack rail and things like that, and assemble working synthesizer constructions. This is some of what I've been working with, in that I'm getting together the rack rails, figuring out how to build it into rack mountable enclosures, because I think that's a good approach. And be able to instruct people and like, this is where you go, this is what you get, this is how you do this and that and the other thing. I feel like the amount of effort that I put into getting all of this stuff straight, I want to share the information. Especially since, I mean, you can see how tiny of a channel I am. None of these people are giving me anything. It's all very much me figuring it out as I go, with no help and no sponsorship from anybody of any kind. So I talk about Blackmagic a lot because I love the video quality. I love the ability to do things like go to an alternate camera, and I've identified some of the things that work really well. But at the same time, there's also massive headaches at times, and this morning was one of them. I started up the A10 Mini, and the on-air lights were not on the cameras, and the cameras were not, they were showing a black screen. And then a little bit after that, I managed to get it to show a screen, but it wouldn't update the cameras off the computer. I couldn't like change contrast and things in the ATEM software. And then it started to behave just bare minutes before going on air. So it's like, okay, that stuff is still giving me headaches, but hopefully that won't always be the case, or I'll figure out what workarounds I need to do. I did try to plug one of the cameras directly into the Razer, because I got a Razer ripsaw for the purpose of reliably getting the video into the computer at a higher quality. And that does work, but I can't run the camera straight into the Razer. It doesn't seem to want to take whatever the camera's output resolution is. So I don't know exactly why that would be, but yeah. God, what was I even talking about? I was talking about sharing my information on the website that I'm putting together that will be coming out. And that's one of the things I'd kind of like to do, is be able to communicate like, okay, if you want to do this kind of stuff, this is the thing to get, this is the thing to get. These are the cameras that you want because this, and this. Namely, if you're operating with Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4Ks, or theoretically 6Ks, but you probably shouldn't. It's probably not going to help you any. Then you can control a lot of their stuff on the actual computer, including on the computer while you're looking at the result on the screen. So that's super helpful when it works, which sometimes it doesn't. But my hope is that I can get it to fundamentally work all the time. That's kind of what you want if you're broadcasting and all of this sort of stuff. I've talked about other things. For instance, if you were to get microphone preamps, you should probably go with like an API. But I recently had an interesting experience looking up the circuitry for Neve Portico. Because you know how the Neve preamps and things have a feature called Silk? I might be able to fit that into a console version. I wouldn't be surprised, because turns out I worked out what does it. What Neve Silk is the making the signal balanced on the output of the preamplifier, and it is a preamplifier that they're using, and running a small voltage into the output transformer on DC to offset it and make it so that the most linear range is slightly off and the distortion that it produces is asymmetrical. Okay, Ilsta, explain what you mean by vocals, please. I will happily, this is a fine time for me to be answering questions for people, because I feel like what I'm doing on the plugin is not necessarily going to be that challenging, so I'll switch over to that momentarily. Or like, I think Bo always likes me to be coding, so I might show up. If he's like, oh, program something, I will do so. I have a game plan. But me talking about the DIY stuff, and I have many thoughts on that. For instance, this format for taking pieces of circuit board and making it so that you can mount it on a Eurorack format. Turns out you can make it fit exactly and use various widths of this for what kind of thing you would use. But I think you can also get a guitar stomp box, one of those Hammond ones, like a 1590. And these, or at least some subset of this, might just fit into one of those. So you could make guitar circuits, like distortions or whatever, and have them be in Eurorack or solder core format is the one I'm talking about. I have an alternate way of connecting the power and signal on these that is much cheaper than doing it Eurorack way. But you could also build stuff like that into a guitar box. And I looked into the Portico circuit, the Neve Portico circuit with that silk thing, and discovered that, yes, it's got that output transformer, but you can, this completely high-end preamplifier, all of its gain stages, once you, I think there's some transistors on the very beginning of it, I think. The gain stages are a available op-amp chip that you can buy. And the place where I get this stuff has actually got 600 of them available. And one of the price breaks is 500. And you can get them for like 40 cents or something. They're not quite like the CMOS chips that you can get down to about 25 cents. But it's still like, well, if people need to build their own things in order to get into this stuff, and you can't just go out and buy an API preamplifier because that's like $2,600. It should be possible to give people the tools to build a working microphone preamp that's better than what you would normally get if you knew the right parts and how stuff like that is done. Like, I could do a mic pre-style circuit that is not a clone of the Neve Portico but uses the same chip, because anybody gets to buy this chip. I could use the same chip and the same transistors and just do it differently. And it wouldn't have any of the, the box or the controls. Might not have the filters because the Neve Portico circuit has like a high pass and stuff in it. And I would be more interested in doing an API style where it's just straight up a gain stage. And you might not be able to get, like, the gain stage here is a op amp that is literally like 40 cents in quantity. On the other hand, the transformers that they are likely to be using are going to be like 30, 40 bucks maybe. So it all depends. And the question is whether you can set people up with the ability to build things that are good enough to be a substantial jump over just trying to plug something into your laptop, the line input or whatever. And this is all exciting. So that's what occupies my time a fair amount of the time. What I've been thinking about doing, and I may very well start doing this. By the way, I'm still waiting for an explanation on vocals. Vocals, please, if you have an actual question, I'm more than happy to answer it. I just don't know what you mean by that. talking about the preamps is a little bit like talking about vocals, please, because one of the key factors for being able to do fantastic vocals is you need to have a exceptional signal path before you record anything. You can't just put up like a laptop mic or something like that, capture that, and then apply plugins to make it be good. It simply does not work. A lot of these things, and this is actually covered in a movie that Dave Grohl made called Sound City, where he talked about recording albums in the Sound City studio, which is a very famous studio. One of the things going on with that is that studio had a fairly rare full-scale, full-on Neve console, and it was their big investment in getting that stuff going. And what it meant in practice is that they had a setup where you could put a mic up, you could record a vocal or a amp or whatever using the pre's built into this console. Record it to tape, play it back, all of it without any compression, equalization, anything, and it would sound fantastic. And that's really important. So the capture path, I'm working on that in the what little music tracking I do. Hopefully that's going to be increasing. I'm working on that in the tracking that I do, because I do have a tendency of laying too many tracks, and I'm starting to learn how not to do that. It's starting to get better, I feel. And the end goal will be composing stuff by doing only a smaller number of tracks, or thinking of only so much, running it into the computer without like, oh, we need to have a shaker and a hat and a clap because those exist. Picking which things are relevant, capturing those into the computer, and then tracking like one guitar and a bass and maybe drum kit, instruments that I enjoy working with, onto that without having 10 of everything, and having all those individual sounds be big enough and intense enough to carry a track. The other day I was listening to a DVD of The Who in concert. It's actually The Who live at Kilburn. And there's two different ones. One of them was them performing just before they did the Kids Are All Right recording. And it was a gig that famously Pete Townsend hated and thought was terrible. And the other one was a earlier gig, just around the time that they were doing Tommy, with much more degraded video and sound quality, but it was kind of a blast from the past, and it had a real sort of retro vibe to it. And that's all a singer, guitar player, bass player, and drummer. There were sometimes other sounds in there, like synthesizer backing tracks or whatever, but that stuff was being made off a very simple arrangement. So that's part of my target as far as like rebuilding the studio and stuff, is think about what I can leave out of the sort of anal retentive tracking thing. It's like, well, let's track 5 of everything in hopes one of them is going to be right. That's not actually good, and I'm learning that. So kernel. I would say if that is because remember, people get distracted by noise floor when talking to digital audio mavens and stuff, because people will be like, oh, digital has much better noise floor. You can't hear beyond noise. Well, actually, that's noise floor is just another kind of signal. The sound and vibe of your recording goes all through the noise floor and becomes part of the overall gestalt of the capture. So you might very well do fine with this Ampeg 2MP. I mean, when you say noise at -40, we're not talking about truncation noise. Maybe there's a lot of low frequency content. Maybe the area around, say, 3K or so, where you need to be able to hear really deep into the soundstage, is cleaner. Or maybe it's higher frequency noise. There's no telling. Ha. Already tried new reverb. Nope, it is not literally Bricasti, nor is it lexicon, but it's using some things that Bricasti talked about publicly. Namely, he was talking about how cool feed-forward reverbs are. And I gotta say, he's absolutely right. Today we're going to experiment with another thing, which is whether he was wrong about insisting that there should be no pitch bending in reverbs. And this might be a good enough time for me to switch over to that. So, boop. I'll have a little quick glimpse of my stream. It seems to be working just fine. I don't know why you would say surprisingly I am here, seeing as I try to be pretty regular about this stuff. The music streaming is much more irregular. I haven't been nearly as regular about that. But as far as doing the coding streams, that's pretty consistent, really. Let me take a ballpoint pen, stick it under the laptop so that it sits in a comfortable place. One of the things I was thinking about recently, as you know, I have one of the Mac M1s. That's not what you're seeing right now because I code on an older machine and I stream on what's actually, something else. Let me fiddle with this a little bit because I need to help the ventilation of this machine, the one that I'm streaming on. I have it set up where I can sit it in a particular way that looks nice and graceful, but it's obscuring some of the cooling vents. So I'm like, oh gosh, I'm doing that. That's why I hear the fan on the iMac that's doing the compression for YouTube. Thanks, Constellation. So here's the deal. Let's try to make a new plugin. I think Constellation, that would depend upon what you're going to call a mastering EQ, because I've got a number of ones that are just fine, and I'm not averse to using multiple plugins for things. Remember that my plugins are doing the dithering to the floating point bus, so there's no penalty to doing more than one plugin on things. I've got a wide variety of biquad filters and things that would work pretty well for that kind of stuff. So, I mean, if you're not feeling it from what I'm already making, then I need a better definition of what a mastering EQ would be. You might just be thinking of something really specific, and that might not be the kind of stuff I generally do. So, depends upon what kind of thing you're talking about. Remember that I have all sliders on my plugins, so having something that's an elaborate interface with a cajillion different things, that's a problem. That becomes cumbersome. That's not a good match to what I do. Making something like a simple biquad filter so you can adjust stuff, that's more along the lines with what I can do. And that should be the last coffee I drink for a little while. I'll start chattering really fast if I'm not careful. So I mentioned that I was running the M1, and I haven't been doing that much with it because I'm still kind of getting used to it. I'm still kind of like setting things up, seeing what works. One of the things that works is kind of interesting. And it is a thought that I've had that might suit people. Quick answer for Mr. Spoogie. Oh, dude, I don't do graphic EQs. Mr. Spoogie, that depends upon how you're going to go about shifting the signal that way. Because the thing is, Oh, I'm not going to be doing graphic EQ. That's not the style of EQs that I make. So shift the signal an octave up before it gets modulated. There's a number of possible ways of going about that. You could do stuff like in Glitch Shifter. I've been thinking about doing a variation on Glitch Shifter where here, let's bounce back to... I've been thinking about doing a variation on Glitch Shifter where I do a version that's fundamentally the same way, except for that it just mechanically does its loop rather than trying to find better places to patch. And there's two ways of going about that. One of them is crossfading between the taps, which is how you get slightly blurry and fuzzy, but less artifacts pitch shifts. And you could be using a sine-based amplitude envelope for that. Or you can just sort of buffer bash the thing and create a pitch shift that also has a loud, intense artifact. And I saw a fellow, it's this producer guy that makes videos and is currently doing some kind of podcast called NTSC Pal. It's a guy who goes by Daydream Sound. And he was demonstrating an older sampler pitch shifter. And I went, oh my God, that's exactly what I would have if I had Glitch Shifter going and didn't do anything sophisticated with the loop transition points. And it would give you this really gritty, edgy overtone on stuff while also pitch shifting it. You get this nasty grind, and I could do that as well. Oh, another update on the M1. Like I said, I've been getting stuff together on that. Some recent update made it so that my plugins no longer have problems on it. I don't know exactly what the combination is. I can't swear that somebody else will have the same experience, but I updated Big Sur and had the most recent version of Logic, which I might not be running the most recent incarnation of Logic, just the most recent update of whatever incarnation I do have. But for whatever reason, it started loading up all of my legacy plugins just as they are, which doesn't change the fact that I still want to make them run native. But it did actually run the plugins, so that's one thing a little bit out of the way. Another thing I'm thinking about on M1 is back in the day when I was doing this thing where I would unwind sometimes with Minecraft streams, and I'd be getting people from the plugin world, and there would be some people that I knew from fandom hanging out and talking. That was kind of nice, but there's probably merit to me doing a little bit of that and just taking a topic to talk about and just derping around doing that kind of stuff while pontificating, because it's kind of like the way that I start out these Q&A streams of just needing to talk about stuff. So I can take a topic, I can do a Minecraft stream, I can do that on the M1, plugging the old headphones with the little microphone attached into that. I could do that on the beach. Thing is, I can't live stream it, so I wouldn't be able to have people chatting or asking questions during it. But I can just hang out and talk. People seem to like me being able to just hang out and talk from time to time, and I can do more of that on the condition that I do it like in a private Minecraft world that I'm not really sharing and there's nobody else there, and I'm just hanging out talking. I'd just be hanging out and talking to you while doing various things. Probably not talking mostly about Minecraft, but talking about things like, I don't know, animation, creativity, tech, who knows what. And I can certainly fill up space that way. And it might be a nice little change off of the more intense, and I'd like to say focused, but I haven't gotten going on the coding part today yet. But that might be a thing. Because again, like I said, I've been trying to work out how that stuff works. And I did a little experiment where I found somebody that was doing a version of Minecraft compiled specially for the M1. It's out there. And it's a little tricky to run, but you get to run it without running the Microsoft launcher. So that doesn't constantly update itself every 2 seconds and risk of inevitably breaking one day. Instead, you're just running it through a terminal command and firing a local version, this directly compiled version for the M1 processor of like Minecraft 1.16.5 to log on to it's actually a paper spigot Minecraft server running on a laptop in the other room. I would call that pretty stable. I would say I'm not going to be updating this Minecraft version because they don't have a version that supports the M1 processor out yet officially. And I'm not going to be updating the server, so that seems like a pretty stable situation. And nothing else is going to be happening, on that at all, so I can just derp around doing whatever and talking kind of like this, and that'll give people a little bit more quest time, a little bit more, like if you're treating it like a podcast, you want to hear somebody talking in a friendly sort of way about the kinds of stuff that I talk about, then that gives me the opportunity to do a little bit more of that. And one of the things I discovered was that although that laptop, running Minecraft on it that's compiled for the M1 processor is giving me upwards of 270 frames per second. Now, the big machine that is currently doing the encoding for YouTube streaming can get up to 240, even though it was more than 4 times the cost, which just goes to show you what M1 is going to be like out there. I have a strong feeling that people are just going to be all over this stuff when it starts to really hit, because you can already get like a Mac Mini based on this technology for surprisingly cheaply, as much as those normally cost, which is like, $600, $800, something like that. And when I try to run YouTube encoding on that machine, it's a very different story. Like, it'll kick the much more expensive iMac all over the map as far as just running Minecraft directly. But if I'm trying to encode using X264 software compression, which works better for YouTube streaming, then the grunty machine that I'm currently running on, I got a new lens. I've been working on the video here. Look, there's another angle, and I'm trying to get to where I can do more of a recording streams, like gradually ramping up into that world, trying to get more and more where that's something that I can do on a regular basis, trying to do it right. But yeah, on the M1, if I run admittedly not compiled for M1 OBS, then the laptop, even though it can do Minecraft faster than the big honkin' machine with like a Xeon 12 core, 18 core, something like that. The Xeon 18 core, 12 core, whatever it is capable of cranking the quality levels all the way up to like slow encoding and still doing a masterful job. And that's what you're seeing now. If I try to do that on the laptop that runs Minecraft so fast, it doesn't have enough cores to do it. That's the thing that can be parallelized a lot. And so I can't do any better than like ultra fast or, fast encoding. So I can't really stream off of that machine, but you can there's a number of things that I got. I got a display menu. You can literally search for a display menu in the App Store, and that can set the screen of the M1 to where I can fit a 1920 by 1080 Minecraft window on it, or any larger screen or smaller or whatever. And there's also what used to be iShowU audio capture, and now has a different name, which I forget at the moment because of many things I'm trying to keep track of during this live stream, and I still hope to get back to the coding. I can run that screen capture and plug the headphones with the microphone built into there and get basically a capture that's using the internal chip, which you can't do for live streaming, but you can do it for like making a screen capture, meaning that now I have a solution for what I used to do many years ago of doing offline recording of like hanging out, playing Minecraft and talking to basically the microphone at extraordinary quality. Extraordinary. Like the 1920 by 1080, hundreds of frames per second, being captured at 60 frames per second if I want, at a high enough capture quality that it's as good as anybody out there. And I can do that very simply with just the new laptop, using the right stuff. I can't stream with it because OBS won't give me encoding that is acceptable. And I already know from experiences that I can't actually use the hardware X264 encoder and go to YouTube and have that actually work. Although it might be worth experimenting to see whether going to like Restream IO would work. But yeah, so that's happening. I wouldn't be surprised if your M1 8G Air beat your Mac Pro with 64 gigs of RAM. That's the experience I'm having. I have the a M1 16 gig MacBook Pro, so it has a little fan, although you don't really experience it very often, and a iMac Pro also with 64 gigs of RAM. And yeah, as long as you're not doing something that can be parallelized super heavily with a gajillion cores, the M1s just run circles around everything. Which is kind of delightful because the entry level is very approachable. Like you're talking about M1 HG Air, that's the entry level for laptops. That's like a little over $1,000 worth of laptop. And it's very cool that there's a bunch of stuff you can do with those things. Have I ever experimented with building Hackintosh machines? No, I actually haven't. At this stage, it's a fool's errand. Because at this stage, it's clearly about if you're going to buy into the Mac ecosystem, it's M1 all the way. It's going to be a huge, huge deal. And I don't think there's going to be any comparison because we're only seeing the very initial signs of this, and it's already intense enough that, like I ran across this on the Hacker News website, Apple has discontinued selling custom iMac Pros. They've just like, nope, you can't have these anymore because they know. You can't keep selling stuff like that if the thing that you're going to come out with next month or whatever is just going to stomp it so badly, you're going to be looking at like a class action lawsuit. They're going to be like, oh, you can't do that. You should have told us. I saw somebody suggest like, oh, well, what they should do is they should just raise the price so that they sell less of them. It's like, no, that's actually completely insane. You can't raise the price on like your iMac Pro because you know that the entry level Mini that you're going to come out with is going to wipe the floor with it for basically just about everything. That is not a time to increase the price if you're quote-unquote high-end equipment. That's the time to not let anybody buy any more of your high-end equipment and then just ramp up production of the stuff that you actually are moving to, which is, I think, what they're going to do. So let me start walking through some of this stuff that I said that I was going to do. It is almost 11:50, 8? It's almost noon. So I should be able to fit in at least an hour of code hacking and doing something like that. Oh, no. It is not a 64 gig M1. There is no such thing. No. I'm comparing the new laptop, which was a 16 gig, although some of this stuff, it would probably just as well be an 8 gig, but I think it's probably better for the SSD to choose the 16 gig of it if you can. It'll swap less, and that's going to wear stuff out a little bit. But the 64 gig is the iMac Pro that I'm streaming off of. And again, that is still a reasonable choice because I need to compress in X264 in software to stream to YouTube properly. I don't have any other good solutions for that. So that's the only real case where the laptop doesn't just stomp all over it. And the ability to compress at such a high quality level is significant. But that's the one that has the 64 gigs, not the M1. So let's fire some of this stuff up before I chat even more. New project. This selection that I'm making is actually selecting a stereo template. It's not a one with a Cocoa view. I have trouble setting up the templates, so I had to swap them in the configuration that they gave me. Like this stuff here that I could choose. I'm still not sure what happens with this. I can set it up so that it will give me a template based on what I'm trying to do in mono or in stereo. And I'm going to choose one of the ones in stereo. And we're going to call it Airwindows Galactic. Well, yeah, that's the thing. You mentioned that you had an Air. You should definitely look into the thing that Linus from Linus Tech Tips did, because I find it completely plausible, and it might very well be worthwhile to do. If I had known about this, I might have chosen a Air myself. If you take the back off of the MacBook Air, you find that there is no fan, because it doesn't run a fan, and there's just a big old heatsink, and that's what's cooling the CPU. And there is a insulating pad, because you couldn't have it like burning your lap. That would be bad, right? Well, the Air throttles itself if it overheats. And it has this heatsink built in that is insulated from the outside world in the bottom surface of the MacBook Air by an insulating pad. Linus, I think, Linus Torvalds, but maybe it's Linus Tech Tips. I don't remember exactly. I'll have to check that out. Linus of Linus Tech Tips did this and did the experiment of taking off the back of the MacBook Air, taking off the insulating pad, which I'm sure voids your warranty, but we already know that that was the thing that would happen, and replacing it with a thermal conductive pad that thermally connects the literal heatsink of the processor to the back of the machine, the aluminum panel. So, and then you put the back on, and the aluminum back of the machine is now in contact with the heatsink, and yes, it will burn your lap. But it won't throttle, because you're pumping the heat out through the outside of the box, through a nice aluminum surface that's going to transmit heat very nicely and extend it outwards into the outside world. That turns the baseline MacBook Air into the MacBook Pro, such as I got, and it's still silent, which is, I kind of would like that. Yeah, it would be Linus from LTT. So if you're willing to do that hack and you don't mind having to put some kind of insulating material, and you could literally be putting like a fiberglass pad that locks all of the heat like right in next to it, because what it already has is worse. It's slightly more concentrated heat in the heatsink, and it's being insulated from the bottom of the enclosure. So if you put it to the enclosure and then sat the laptop on some kind of heat insulating pad, that's still better than what it started out with. Or you could have like some kind of thing where it circulates air a little bit better maybe. There's a number of things that you could do with laptops that are hot and uncomfortable to work with. And I think that's kind of neat. I kind of like the idea of getting a baseline MacBook Air laptop, the cheapest available one, and doing this modification where now it works about as well as one about twice the price. That seems pretty cool to me. I like the idea. Although I also like having what little ports it has. The Pro, it has like 2 FireWire 3 ports. And one of them you use to charge it up, although it's not like you have to keep it connected to power, because it really does run for like 20 hours without running out of batteries. It's crazy that way. But it does have fairly limited ports. But yeah, I gotta say that, Jas, I would kind of recommend that instead of doing the oversampling things that way, you do it the way that I tell you. But we'll see. I design my stuff around a certain workflow, so that might not necessarily, it depends upon what kinds of sound you want to get. But yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that you don't want to be doing something like 32 times oversampling on all your plugs. I would strongly recommend just running at a higher sample rate and using plugins that are, like my stuff increasingly is designed to give you the same or better effect. And if you're running another plugin, like a third-party plugin from somebody else that can do oversampling, then by all means you can oversample that one. I'm trying to get to where you don't have that oversampling sound, that overly processed, because it's not the same as like high-quality analog. The oversampling sound is not at all the same as good sound. It's just different than the heavily aliased sound, that's all. So let's dig into this a little bit. My hope is I can at least get started. I'll chatter as we go, and rather than open that, I think I want to open an alternate version, such as plugins, the Mac VST version, because that's the version that is already in stereo. And I'll basically be adapting it right back to an AU version, but the AU is actually a stereo AU this time. And from there, I go on from there. Firstly, and I'm going to be moving these over as they need to be. Identity is Gala for Galactic. Be like Airwindows Galactic Patrol. My plugins are MIT licensed. You're supposed to copy them. That said, I don't know if he necessarily did. It's interesting what people turn out to be Airwindows fans. Sometimes I'm very happily surprised by that stuff. Here, let me take a second to copy some of these things around. You know, I'm probably okay using the doubles rather than necessarily having to go to float 64s. I'm not absolutely sure about that, but I think I'm probably fine with that. Oh, let me also open the Verbity, the audio unit version. So I've got that open. If I open this, I can copy the control identities over directly, because the VST handles that differently. And I'm going to be leaving all of the extra stuff. I am indeed running Snow Leopard. I'm compiling for incredibly old school stuff on purpose, and that's never going to change. I just also need to get the new machine. I need to get a workflow going so that I can get stuff over to the new machine, probably using GitHub to do it, and run an additional build so that there can be a M1 Mac version, because I cannot compile that on this setup right here that I'm currently using. It is like super heavy, impossible to do. And that's because Apple wanted it that way, which I think is very rude, but true. Apple throws away backward compatibility all the time. I do not like, but I will work with them for what they are able to deliver. There we go. We'll blank out some of these things because we're not going to be using them directly. Not yet. We're going to get into it later. There, now we'll have 10 sliders. Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading about the M1s, and in particular the argument on Hacker News was extremely amusing, because people responded pretty positively to several of us who were like, yeah, I have a maxed out, largest possible Xeon iMac Pro with the 64 gigs of RAM, and the new little laptop runs circles around it doing this and this and this. Several of us chimed in saying, yep, this is happening. And other people were like, that is not possible, that's not okay, Intel rules forever, and so on. And one of them came up with a website going like, oh yeah, here's where it succeeds, and here is where it fails catastrophically. And they had a couple of things where the M1 laptops were not doing great. And one of them was running emulation Warhammer. So it's like, okay, a video game that depends incredibly heavily on the elaborate graphics card, yeah, I can see. I don't own Warhammer, so I don't need to worry about that one. And a bunch of the others, you know, like graphics and video work and so on, and anything that isn't enormous parallelization, the M1s were just like, zip, and tended to beat stuff from 4 to 10 times its price in previous Macintoshes. So it goes to figure. Let's see, so we've got this. We'll quit that out of there. I'm not entirely sure what I have here, but I'm going to dig back into these things and figure out what I need. I've done the version. I've done the H file. I'd better have done the H file. That is what I just did, right? Yep. Now I got to do the CPP file and then build it and check that I have something up and running, and that's when I can start hacking on it and doing new things. I really don't know what a GML AK2 is. Here's the thing. It's funny. People keep talking about EQ plugins and things, but increasingly what I'm finding most useful is correct microphone placement and choosing stuff to where you don't need to EQ at all. And that is a trade secret. It's kind of like I was on another forum. I had put out Verbity, and I mentioned to them, hey, you might want to check this out. I'm probably going to be looking into new versions of this kind of stuff, but they'll be adding things, and such as a way of stereo spreading, because I think Bo asked earlier, Verbity is in dual mono, and yes, Verbity is in dual mono. And Verbity specifically does not have stereo pitch shifting. So if you put something in the center, that something stays in the center. Like if you throw Seriously 2 on it to just hype out the stereo wideness and stuff, nothing's going to happen. There's no side content for it to work with, even in a long reverb tail. And that's what I'm doing right now. But some of the folks in this other forum, it's a sort of a old grizzled industry experts forum, like guys that mix the vinyl records that I grew up loving. So that's exciting to hang out in. And one of the things that those folks have going on is there is a sort of quiet sideline in there of using reverbs. And one of their silver bullets is taking hardware reverbs. Like you got your MIDI verb, it's a stereo verb, stuff like that, old lexicons, and using 2 versions of that reverb in order to run it in dual mono so that it will behave the same way that my plugin does. So I was like, okay, I'm doing some edits on this, what I'm currently doing, what you see on the screen, to get that stereo spread happening. But I know that some of you guys go for the dual mono that this default Verbity plugin already is, so you're kind of all set. You know, you're welcome. There you go. I've been making that choice for some time, and that's kind of the deal there. Similarly to EQs is there is a lot to be learned around arrangement and designing a mix that's not about, because it's funny how it works. It's like, I was in a discussion with one of those folks. It's the person that got me to use flat wounds on my Rickenbacker, which I went back on because I grew up on loving round wound Rickenbacker songs, and so I just basically, I was like, nah, I'm going with what I love. I get that this is better in a lot of ways. I don't care. I'm going with what I love. But he also talked me into using condenser microphones on guitar. At which point I realized that only a few guitar sounds actually benefit from the things I'd been developing with using an SM57 and finding exactly the right spot on the cone to mic to get that thing going on. That only really is great when you're using a chuggy, high gain, heavy metal tone that's really difficult to manage. And the recommendation of using a condenser mic, first of all, I'm using the Mini K47, the Roswell Mini K47, and that's a microphone that can handle high frequencies without making them sound unnatural, so it's a perfect match for that. I'm also using it on drums, and generally quite happy with it. All of the guitar sounds that I go for and like are more easily achieved by a decent, a good large diameter condenser microphone like the Mini K47. And then the other day in that conversation, I was like, yes, this is absolutely true. This is why I moved away from the SM57. Now I'm going to go and put one back just so that I have one to select if I feel like doing that again. Because I do recognize that there are some guitar tones that benefit from that. And again, avoiding EQs, that's going to give you a somewhat processed tone where, excessive lows are not going to come through the microphone when it's one of those, because it can't. The highs are going to be sculpted in such a way where sort of nasty, ratty, hissy noises are not going to come through it unless you have it at such a high sound pressure level that the microphone is itself distorting, and you don't really want that. But it's going to condition the sound to make certain things work in that way. And these are ways of shaping the sound without going to EQ, because it's like the opposite of the Oak Sound Soothe thing, which I always am very sassy about. I am sassy about Soothe because I don't feel that it's generally useful to smooth out like peaky resonant intensities in sounds and bring stuff up that isn't there. All of your sounds will just end up taking up the entire frequency spectrum and you'll have nothing but mush. And when you talk about automatically going to EQ things, that's different. That's like, there are some issues such as digital mixes don't inherently take out subsonic frequencies. So that's a concern. I might be looking into a version of console that incorporates taking out subsonic frequencies and see what I can get out of that. But if you're sculpting everything with EQ as a matter of course, there are problems with that approach. And it'll get you to a sound that I don't happen to like, I don't think is very strong. It might be more suited to when you have a kabillion tracks, and I'm much more interested in getting things back to a place where people can make mixes in music with a set of basic tracks and sounds and things, whether they have enough money to get API preamplifiers, etc., or go into a studio, or whether they're building stuff themselves out of raw parts, which I'm going to try to encourage. You should be able to do the gnarlier, more vibey stuff that benefits from not EQing it upon working with it. That's just my take on that. Yeah, bro, nobody presents me with anything. I'm not important enough for anybody to sponsor or give stuff to, so everything I have to get myself. And you can basically go back in my videos and identify the point where my mom and dad passed away in Pennsylvania, leaving their children a house and their bank account and stuff. And the reason they were able to do that is because they formerly lived in Lexington, Massachusetts, on a lot that had become sort of a town, Lexington, that had become like McMansionville. And we had a crappy old house that we lived in since like the early 70s that was on a lot that was big enough for two separate McMansion lots. And so when they moved to Pennsylvania, they sold that property and the house just got knocked down. And my family, boy, I'm going to do some Minecraft streams and talk about like where I come from sometimes, but nobody cared that they knocked down the house because we had no good feelings about any of it. And my uncle pitched in and helped my mom get the property evaluated where you could count it as two separate lots. So they got to sell it for like twice as valuable as it otherwise was in Lexington, which was being turned into McMansion land and taken over by incredibly wealthy people. So they made out like absolute bandits. And then my mom and dad lived in Pennsylvania near my sister for a goodly number of years after that. And then when they passed away, me and two brothers and one sister, like I said, you can see when I ended up having money. And I actually had the API preamplifiers before then, but that is kind of where some of these things like being able to get a Roswell Mini K47 or a set of them for recording drums is, yeah, I'm buying, nobody's giving me anything. I'm buying stuff, and that's pretty much the only reason, is that mom and dad passed away. And like, oh, rich Uncle Oswald passed away. So I'm trying to share the information that I'm developing from that kind of stuff. And I'm also trying to share the plugins that I continue to make. And I was making those back in the day when I absolutely needed to have Patreon or Kagi before that working in order to be able to live, because my folks pretty much would not do a damn thing for me while they were around. Certainly for a long time, and then when they moved to Pennsylvania, my mom figured out like, oh hey, yeah, actually we're kind of upper class, aren't we? Maybe we shouldn't be acting like we're dock workers and everybody has to scratch or die in their lives. And things changed a little bit then. But most of my life I've been acting as if I'm this very lower class character that can barely get by. And that was my life for a long time. So I have a foot in both worlds. Little did I know. So Jas, you're talking about aliasing and oversampling, and it is an interesting subject. It is a subject that I don't necessarily agree with everything that you've been reading about it. Like, my oversampling filter ultrasonic behaves in some ways better than Tokyo Dawn's ultrasonic, which it's modeled after and which has a steeper cutoff. The Tokyo Dawn is a brick wall filter. Mine is a simple biquad. It does a certain amount of phase shift. It doesn't run any latency, whereas Tokyo Dawn's does, because it's a brick wall. But you don't necessarily get better performance for the way you're thinking. And again, digital distortions aren't necessarily incredibly sharp-edged. And there's multiple ways of going about it. Like AD clip doesn't generate the same kind of, and there was a update that I wanted to do on the clip only as well. And I don't remember what the hell it was. Anyways, let's get a little more of this done while I can. Here's our reset. We're going to want to go into the VST for this one, because that's going to give me this stuff. That's going to go here. And let's see where we can get. I might just let this be another, this is the one that I do on streams, because these reverb things are interesting in their way. Excuse me for the sniffling. Sometimes when my glasses clamp my nose down too hard, I get sniffly. And lastly, since I don't think we need to have the AU open anymore, over to this, and let's adapt it to what we're going to find here. We're going to port the Verbity VST over to Galactic CPP and run it, and at the very least we'll do that today. Let's get it to a point where it's operating. I would have more done, but there was plenty of stuff to chatter about, so we did some of that instead. Note that we have two different spellings of get sample rate. VST, lowercase g. IU unit, higher case g. Because they're different systems. So we'll go from here and leave this here for the moment, but translate it over. And by translate, what I mean is we're going to be copying some of this stuff over and deleting it out of where it lives. Get parameter 1 is what lives in what was formerly called A. Boop. Get parameter 2 was formerly known as B. And this regen here, when it says 0.625 plus this, 0.625 is a regeneration level that equates to like word length shift gain. So that minimum setting is a higher quality setting. And the max here is not literal full reverb. That would be like a 1. But it's another aspect. It's closer, it's more like 3 dB down or something like that. Yeah, LQ2, the thing about the oversampling is that I would suggest running at a higher sample rate, but the thing is you still need to filter between stages. If you are oversampling every plugin individually, what you're effectively doing is a lot of wasteful conversion on top of also filtering between stages. You could run at 96K and just brick wall filter everything between stages and be doing better than oversampling, because what you're really trying to do is suppress the aliasing. You never actually need to come down to the output sample rate. All you need to do is filter as if you were coming down to the output sample rate. If you actually go down to the output sample rate, that is an additional degrading of the sound that is not necessary. So it's the filtering that matters. It's the filtering between nonlinear stages that matters. And we can build that into a digital mix by making the plugins do it. Bro77 look ahead limiter. Well, if you have look ahead time, you can have a slower attack and it'll start reacting before the sound actually hits. That's the thing. Slower release can result in a more transparent result. Basically, slower time change of any kind gives you a more transparent result. Faster time change of any kind gives you a less transparent result and more aliasing. Like infinitely fast is basically just clipping. So attack and release time are not the same thing as look ahead time. Look ahead time lets you do a slower attack time and still be able to catch up to what the signal is doing. Like you will have turned down in time to not clip. If you had a faster attack because you weren't using as much look ahead time, it will alter the volume more sharply and produce more of an effect. And slower release time means it stays quieter for longer. Faster release time means you can get more level out of it. My pressure compressor will show you some of that stuff. It has a single speed control, but it works basically the same way. And yeah, as far as projects with high sample rates, you can do it all with filtering. You never actually have to upsample or downsample anything, but you do have to filter between gain stages. Otherwise, you will produce aliasing even at the higher sample rate, eventually, if you do enough to the sound to do it. So let's see, where are we going? We've got two things in slider 3, which equates to C, so let's do that. Because we are not doing, oh, and there's B again. That translates to parameter 2. We may or may not even be leaving thunder in this because we are going to be increasing it up to a maximum of total sustain. And then slider 4 is wet versus dry. Note that it is 2 times what it should be. That's because the wetness control is not wet-dry as we're familiar with it. Wetness control means going up to 50%. The reverb volume just increases without reducing the dry at all. And then exactly halfway you get both at full volume. And then from 0.5 to 1, you're going to wet at full volume and turning it down. And that is so that you can manipulate the loudness of the reverb in normal situations if you have it sitting on an aux or bus of some kind, without modifying the level of the rest of the tracks. It's designed to be built into that situation rather than only running as an aux. So let's see. How are we doing? We have done that, but we are going to still need to do a little bit more. But we can delete this because we don't need it anymore. But also, an interesting thing about this, these now sound the same at all sample rates, because at higher sample rates I'm literally interpolating between the output things. My high sample rates on Verbity and this new Galactic are fake, because you don't want lots of supersonic frequencies bouncing around in reverbs anyway. That's not what air does. So it's a perfect candidate for this. And that means I can get the reverb durations, any reverb duration that I want, and have it blend perfectly and be just fine. Technically, I could interpolate it in a more complicated way, but I'm not, because the interpolation is actually happening before the filtering stage anyway. So here we go. We're going to go between dry sample and the dither, kind of like this. And this probably is all I'm going to need. And then I'll be off and running. There's the dither. And we're going to see whether it works right out the box. Because then we can start modifying. Got to do 2 builds. Ooh, I don't think in the 80s and 90s most engineers mixed in 82 and 96. I've never heard anything of that. Oh, what's this slider 2 and 3 business? Oh, I just took those out. Never mind. Let me fix that, but now it should compile just fine. Let's find out whether that's true. Nope. Because I needed to include that twice. No, I need to include that from here. Param 3. It's using both of those parameters in there. And this is still the thing that I might need to take away. And there was something else which I forget what it was. It was redeclaration. That's because we don't want that. Now it'll build. That's meaningless stuff, but it just gets that out of my way. Yeah, I mean, especially in the 80s and 90s, I know people were basically working at the base sample rates as a general thing. Not terribly likely to have, I mean, certainly in the 80s, and I'm trying to think if I've ever run across anybody who was like, I'm working in the all digital and that is why I'm doing 96K. Often people are just like, get better converters. My hope is that these days we're moving into an area where something like 96K becomes more the default, because that gives you enough range to be able to get sufficient quality mixes out of things. Move this guy over, go to the build folder, release, and copy it into components. Let's go to one of my drum sound thingies. I can only drink so much coffee. That's the second cup, so that's probably all I can drink today. I do have a water bottle. I don't know about Swedish seawater for nose. Maybe that's a thought. I still have a bunch of chopped ginger that I can make tea out of, and I seem to just forget that that was ever a thing. So let's see, Airwindows and G for Galactic. What do we got? I do believe that is the relevant thing. So the next thing for me to do is a very quick mod that I should be able to, you won't be able to hear it because you're listening to everything over the lavalier mic, but I should be able to hear the result of this. I'm going to cross over the reverb tanks. And I feel I can do that fairly simply by going oh, I'll have to do it here as well. I might have done, maybe let's do it on the feedback instead. Keep hitting the wrong keys, darn it. Come on, you. There, again, I might not be keeping this thunder parameter, as it's kind of neat, but I'm kind of working with something more delicate. These are indeed reverbs, yes. That's what we're going to do in the last 20 minutes or so of the stream. Algos is what I bet you mean. Kind of neither. It's a sort of overall concept. And specifically, Galactic is outer depths of space reverb. Oh, Jess, didn't you mention the Fibonacci sequence sometime before? I don't actually have stuff that can drive MIDI, so although I could do hardware that way, but not really worried about that right at the moment. Let's quickly build this, and I want to see whether let's fire up the note generator. It does that. I'll delete that. Now I have a beep on one side. I need to remember not to save this. Airwindows Galactic. Let's see what we got. And indeed, it goes side to side. That's kind of what I was shooting for. Let's close this, not save that, and get a additional level going here, such as, let's take this out. Simplest way of going about this is to take the whole thunder parameter out, because we're going to be doing deep space to infinite reverb anyway. Therefore, I'm not sure how useful it's going to be. I can always get it back by digging into an older project. And if we do this, I'm just deleting some of this stuff willy-nilly, see how that goes. And let's grab a calculator quickly and figure out what we need to do to get to literally 1.0. Wait, it's not even 1.0 that I'm going to want. It's going to be something else. Let's see whether, I'm trying to remember, did two of these get me to what actually turns out to be infinite reverb? I bet. I seem to remember that being a thing. So another little quick build phase. We now know that the stereo thing works, so I don't have to really worry about testing that twice. Can if I want. And we're going to fire up, I think I just copied that over. And now we have an infinite feedback that is also crossfading and going back and forth. And the way this darkness works, this filtering is on the input and on the output, but not in the regeneration loop. So the regeneration loop is still infinite. So here's what we were going to do next. Let's dig up Verbity, or not Verbity, let's dig up one of the older reverbs, because we're going to dig up the, just go to open. And not from AU either, from the VST, because that's stereo. We are going to dig up, I don't think reverb either. Matrix verb is the one I'm going to want. There it is right there. See, this has a M filter bank. M was hanging around being the pre-delay, and that's what we're going to use. So back over to the galactic window, if I can find it. There it is. You know, Jazz, the funny thing is that's why I sound incredibly scattered and have enormous difficulty, like, feeding myself without setting the pots on fire or, you know, shoveling snow and stuff. Is there's a lot of stuff that remains online in my head, and that's just how I do my work. So it's a stew. It's like everything at once, and that's how I can make connections, like being able to put some of this stuff together and know what out of 200 previous earlier plugins applies to the new thing. But yeah, there are costs to that as well. But this is what I do for a living, so that is what I consider important. So yeah, so you're important, Jess. And more reverbs don't have a high pass for the side only or mono below a certain frequency. Huh. Yeah, there are reasons why that would act more like a literal pair of microphones working. That is legit. I mean, as long as I have a filter going, that's something that I can include in this spacey thing going on. And you can indeed use another tool for that. I'm deciding whether I want to do this from this or from the other one. From the other one. How about you move over? Thank you. I'm going to want one of those. But I'm going to want to steal this from one of these, because unlike in the previous ones, in this case, I do want the pre-delay to be doing a pitch bend. So we're stealing some of that stuff out of other delay bins in a previous reverb that is also a delay tank, but one with reverb built in. I mean, one with vibrato built in. So, but we're not actually going to be using feedback because that's not a thing for this. So that's the bits we're going to use. And the reason we're doing count, and we can move that down to here where those live. We're not doing feedback because this is not a comb filter or an all-pass filter. Well, I don't know that I beat everybody with this yet because firstly, that's not really a thing. And secondly, because I haven't got it coded up yet. I think that's all the variables I needed. Now I need to go to here where we initialize them and adapt that to Galactic, where we initialize them here. Like that. Why are these not declaring a because I'm declaring them here. Okay. That's why it's not being declared up there. I knew I was going to get around to doing it elsewhere. There's that for now. So depth is not a thing, I don't think. But we're going to want to do this vibe thing. Did I instantiate that? Yeah, we don't need that to be there. Have I not included that? Have I missed that somehow? We're not offsetting it. Let's dig into this and figure out how it was actually being implemented. Confusing myself. That stuff's going to live here. So now I'm trawling through this and finding a place where I am doing this. Here we're doing the feedback. This is delay tanks. This is the Reverb, the householder implementation. But this isn't where I'm doing the vibrato, and that's what I'm looking for. I will find the place that it's doing the vibrato, and we will include it. So that's fine. That's fine. So I'm going to be looking for a Vibe ML and a Vibe MR. Let's make sure I have that in the H file, which of course I don't because I wasn't using that before. And you know, technically I only need one of these because they're not independent. It's going to be a single one, and I'm doing that quadrature thing where one of them is a certain place on the sine wave and the other one is 90 degrees offset. That's a fairly simple calculation to make, and I know exactly where I'll be making it. Ooh, Patrick, I'm hoping to start doing a little more streaming of various kinds. We'll see. The delay size for different all-pass filters or anything like that, you do have to choose different numbers. There are criteria, but they're kind of it's difficult to define. Let's go back to the matrix verb and find where that was defined. That will suffice. I'm pretty sure it's M I had. Yeah, we're going to call that correct. Delay M, all well and good. Oh, show me the thing, thank you. So we're going to take this and make it be a Vibe M. So after the initial filter, or should it be after the initial filter, or should we be doing this offset? No, let's do it before the initial filter. So delete that. Make it a little space in here. Now we're starting to make this vibrato thing happen. And we're going to steal the pre-delay. Neither of those exist at the moment, so we're going to make Vibe M be very small. We do have a count M, but here's where we're going to start affecting things. We need to reconstruct a interpolating delay out of this, because this is going to turn into a different output for this. That's very simple. That is just a linear delay. It doesn't actually change its integer values. It doesn't change the sound. It just is a pre-delay. We're not looking for that. We're looking for something a little more complicated. So after the all passes, we've just incremented 5, so that's fine. So we're going to steal this from here, do a couple of these. I'm trying to remember what the number that I want. Actually, don't I have it in another file? Or indeed on the desktop somewhere? No, I don't think so. I think in one of these somewhere I have pi. Oh no, wait, I remember where I've got it. I've got it in like vibratos and stuff. So let's go find. We're going to do a modification of this. I think that's going to give me a seamless vibrato here. Yeah, well, like when I'm recording, that is mixing and mastering. I'm setting things up as they go. I could do with the most recent one that I did, spend a little time doing that. Right now I'm thinking about this, so. So there we go. We're incrementing this very slowly. Not worried about that so much at the moment. That could be anything. Right now it's being a extended, let's see now. I was stealing this out of here. Did I copy it? Yes, I did. That'll get me going. See what I'm doing? Adding too many parentheses is what I'm doing. There we go. So one of these is a sign of this going around, and the other one is that, but offset a little bit. So it's always going to start at a higher place and continue onwards, but it should be the same chunk of a sine waved shape in the LFO. One of these is offset, the other one is not. And vibe depth is not a thing. So let's see what else we can make happen. Let's steal these two and see where we get. So we needed that. And then we're going to go into the detailed interpolation thing, but without all of the complication. This is the bit that lets me add to adjacent samples, where in each case, if it's gone beyond the boundaries of the overall delay thing, it'll wrap around. And I'm probably going to try to set it up so that it has a ginormous vibrato, just to make sure it works. I might even skip the reverb entirely just to make sure that this is a thing and that it is working. So delay M is my maximum length. I don't have an offset. But offset should be, I should be able to make offset be as big as what delay is. Oh no, wait, I'm generating offset right here. Vib depth is what I don't have. That is a very big amount, but it's not so much that it'll get me in trouble. And I'm going to need to duplicate this for the right channel. And let's go back to the other one and see what else we've got. We've done the interpolation. I think this is crossfading between the interpolation and the raw factor, which is not what we actually want. And then this is cross-mod, and these are the feedback networks as well. But this is where we feed each of our interpolated vibratoed things into the next stage. And our output for this one is input sample equals interpol, all these things added together. And that's where we need to leave off, because now, instead of, see how we've got, instead of simply the delay, we've got all this stuff here. We had to have interpol here to add these two things together. We could just make an enormous line of code, but I don't feel like doing that. So what we're going to do is put that in, and we're also going to let's apply it to dry so I can directly hear what it's doing. Double, what the heck is going on here? Where did I even define that before? Oh, this is where. That's what that was about. We're going to run these together. We might as well set them all on one line. What? Now what? Name lookup of count change for new ISO 4 scoping. Oh, I never declared it. There we go. Now that matches the rest of the stuff and it should work. Signs point to that worked. Now let's see whether we can take a sine wave and hear two notes out of this that are different notes through applying just only the dry channel. Wetness 0. Okay, that's a low frequency sine there. Also, it does not sound like it's doing much. Let me go to a higher sine and see whether I even feel like there's any sense of pitch changing there. I think it almost feels like it is, but let's exaggerate it some more. Starting it in a random place. That's going to give me something. A 100 times the effect. Do I now have two pitch shifts? And if I flip this into literal mono, alrighty. So that worked. Let's cut back. I'm trying to decide whether to cut back the size of this pre-delay. I feel like I don't need quite this much of it. Yeah, let's do that. We'll go from this 3000 spaced 1 to... I'm a little concerned because verbity Let's leave the maximum buffer space in case I need to do something having to do with sample rate. Yeah, I'm going to need to rest pretty soon too, my friend. I'm about 13 minutes over what I was intending to spend, but that always happens. But there is something I'm doing at 2, so I literally can't just do infinite hours. I'm going to try to avoid doing that. I have a tendency to start streaming and then I'm just there until everybody has fallen over and died. So let us not do that. I don't really need this to be random either. I mean, I could, but I don't have to. So our delay time is a maximum of 3,000. That is actually literally verbity. Verbity is including that stuff, but this one cannot because this one is a different concept. And let's It's actually not depth at all. That's how fast it's changing. Now what I'm going to do is see what we get when I'm applying very small amounts of this, and maybe my amount of delay I don't think I can do that, Josie. That does not sound like a thing. It would be including like glitch shifter or something. So there's no technical merit for that, but it's the sort of thing like Valhalla, like Uber mod delay does that. You can get stuff like that. You don't necessarily need me for those things. Let's tighten some of this up. I'm a little concerned. I mean, this is working and I'm happy that it's working, but I'd also like to not automatically have tons of pre-delay, which this initially was designed to do. So we're figuring this out. I think maybe for now we'll just leave it the way it is. And we'll start putting something more normal on it, or more test tones. I think actually my first thing is going to be more test tones, because here's the deal. I have my Quadrature Vibrato going on. It's doing the pitch shift. It's doing the pitch shift offset on different things. So what we're going to do now is firstly build that, and then I'm going to listen to it applied to some continuing notes so that I can hear whether it's generating stereo frequencies the way that I thought it is. Here's our default sound. I never even tested out the full. No, actually I did, didn't I? Longness at 1 is giving me the full decay. And now we're running galactic. Pitch amount is turned up all the way and it ain't doing nothing. So what did I miss? I'm missing something. Oh, I'm making it go away. Here's your problem. Those were there so that it didn't complain in the build. But I'm using slider 5 for something now, so we can't do that anymore. If I had moved all those sliders, it would have actually worked. I had it set up in a way where it'll show me what's supposed to happen. Let's go to our annoying sine again. Other kinds of noises would work too, but a sine is going to give me my perfect version of this, and you probably should be able to hear it as a sort of final thing for the stream as I go. Like here is our dry signal. Oh. Well, that's no good. Something went wrong. So I have to fix what's making it do that. That is not right. Delay was 3000. It's a weird thing, it wasn't doing that before, so what happened? What are you doing? So this offset stuff seems about right. The sine seems about right. Let's find out what happens if we literally never update this. What's going to happen there is vibe is going to end up going to insanely high numbers and then eventually wrapping around again. So there will be presumably a pop at some point. So if I'm understanding this correctly, it will no longer do that pop. That doesn't mean this is the right answer, but it will lock down whether it's doing what I thought it was doing. That being sometimes what one does. All right, sure enough. And it's definitely over too large of a space. So I'm thinking, let's cut this back some. And it does not like me. Let's see what happens if I do this. It's making a pop suggesting that I'm trying to go between versions of pi incorrectly. So what happens if my limit to wrap around to be 0 again is actually twice what pi is? Am I trying to do only one cycle of it and then snapping back? Because that's not what it's supposed to be doing. We'll find out. We'll find out momentarily. And we've also simultaneously made the space that it's taking a little bit less. That might be shifted having to do with the sample rate, because we are still applying things to the sample rate. The main guts of the reverb are no longer applying to the sample rate, but what we're doing now is Okay, that's interesting. Well, that was not helpful, but it was a thing. Oh, hang on. That's not right. Term to term. Yeah, some of this I'm eventually going to be doing on like Minecraft streams, just chatting about stuff, because I either get distracted by working on things and then find that I haven't noticed a cajillion different chat messages, or I'm sitting there wishing somebody would say something and there's nobody there. So, now we have no sound at all. This could arguably be considered unhelpful. All right. How is that even possible? Have we even defined vibem? Let's start it off as that. So we're not touching it anywhere else. And it's increasing here. Slider 5 is not negative, it's 0 to 1. If it's larger than something having to do with this, we'll make it be 0. If we count that out, it kind of goes properly, so it's making it be 0 that seems to be the problem. And we do need to make a sign of it. The offset goes to a size that is, oh, I know what's happening. My offset is too large. My delay only goes this big, but the offset was going right beyond the end of the delay. That's why I'm not getting anything. So I started at 3000 and I had a delay of 1000. If I have it at 300 and I have a delay of 100 or 150 or something like that, it'll still work. That's probably also why it was misbehaving, so I don't actually need this here. My problem was not with signs misbehaving. My problem was that I was scaling the offset beyond the end of the delay buffer. Let's see what we've got now. And back into the fray. The chorus is a pitch shift. Well, that's still not right. Why am I assuming that doing a sign on some extremely large number is going to be a problem? Why am I assuming that pi is the correct number for this? Let's see what we get doing this same experiment that failed previously. Oh, I see another thing. Or no, wait, no, that's not actually going to be a problem. Don't mind me. Brain's trying to keep track of some of this stuff. I wanted to go through a full cycle. Sine will return between 1 and -1. I'm adding one, meaning that my total becomes 2, and my range of adjustment is 2 times 150, which is exactly as much as the maximum delay buffer, which maybe is where I'm running into a problem. So let's see what we got now. Okay, kind of tightly arranged, but this is working. Now let me show you what we get. Slightly less than total longness. We get a lot of distortion, that's what we get. Yeah, so that hurts. That's too loud. Maybe because of the... No, it's still too loud. Sine is too much, man. You need the gain stage stuff going into reverb, so let's just gain stage this down a little bit. Especially if we have as much sustain as we're able to do now. There. So our former one will do this. So this is what Verbity would do. This is not your pitch shift reverb. This is what you get if you're doing the Bricasti style no pitch shift. Can also darken it down a little bit. Here's what happens when we start introducing pitch shift in the way that we did. I feel like somehow the distortion is getting into it. So that is now super wide, even though it was a middle centered sound. Let's pick a different note. Let's pick something more interesting like this. It'll make a kind of a thump. And I'm still going to have to attenuate it. Although I suppose I could attenuate it by 1 minus the feedback quotient. Let's do a couple of quick changes. I can make the max delay be a little bit bigger because we are... Actually, no, let's double it. 3,000 was more than we needed. Pile of sudden changes, as one does. And this one seemed to work so far, so we got that going on. and we were going to attenuate by the inverse factor of regen. So what that means is I got regen. Actually, no, hang on. Let's fiddle with that a little more. Don't need this comment anymore. There. So this is going to become 0 at totally full crank, and at other settings it's going to be a little higher than that. Actually, no, it's still going to be 0.5 at full crank, but maybe that's fine. We do have to cope with loud sounds coming in anyhow. Maybe that's just how this is going to normally work. Attenuate, so if this works properly, we can blend between infinite reverb and new stuff coming in with MIDI automation. That might be cool. And let's test it by going back to the annoying high sine and seeing if it hurts still, because this is far too loud for normal use, but maybe now it's going to be fine. So that's the minimum delay. Here's raw. Yeah, I think that kind of is working. And then if we go to infinite, it's just persisting. There's no new information coming in now. But as we blend it back in, oh, here, check this out. Infinite, and we're setting pitch to crazy. And now when I blend away from the ultimate sustaining, we hear just a little bit of the flutter coming in, and gradually it replaces it. I think we're starting to get something that works here. We may or may not need to mess with bigness. And let's get out of there and do something that makes some more interesting noise. Like this. It's just going to be kind of too loud. Maybe. Here's our raw sound. Oh, huge bigness. You can maybe hear some of this. I don't know. It is not blowing up the output, so that's good. And then at full crank, we're a little less than 6 dB down, so that might be a good space factor. And now as we start introducing pitch amount, we're starting to get a stereo effect, which you can't hear because you're hearing everything over the lavalier. And then as we increase longness, I might be able to boost the output level of this. I'm pretty consistently not being as loud as 6 dB down. On the other hand, that's what the input is supposed to be, at 6 dB down, so I shouldn't really be going much beyond that, if at all. No, this is probably an acceptable level. And then lastly, enough with the sine waves, because that's just giving us a sense of this. Let's fire up the drums and see what we get with the loud. Well, actually, no, that's a terrible idea because that doesn't have pitch. Let's do one of my Dragon's tracks, like Wood Dragon, which is kind of serene sounding and hangs on a note. I still feel like this could be 6 dB up. And the raw signal is this. I'm liking that I can put longness to 1.0 and it's just permanent sustain and then sneak in other stuff by manipulating it. I'm not liking that everything is so quiet, so let's double the volume neatly. How shall we do that? By so let's see, we're multiplying by attenuate. So we're going to multiply that by 2 to get to what we wanted. Because it's continuing to be excessively quiet. And I could fiddle with that by so let's see what we got. out of that. That should neatly double the volume, which for most of these settings will be at correct. And back into Dragons. And let's see what we got. Hopefully it'll be enough louder that you'll be able to hear the magic to which you refer. Yep, that's louder. In fact, it's now too loud. Yeah, made a mistake. Let's go back. How about a third as much of what that was? And getting almost ready to log off here, run about 45 minutes extra. But this is, when we do this, we try to get to results. I'm getting to results. So we'll call that the point of the exercise. Come on, you. So verbity would be kind of like this. But then, when we start doing the pitch changey thing, as you can hear, we get some pretty intense seasicky sounds going on. But the key is to get longness going. So now we have a sustainy, verby space noise. And we've turned that into space. That was the point of making a plugin called Galactic. And this is at a fairly small bigness setting, like we can just find spots here. Pick spaces and make them go. Yeah, the thing is, pitch down in the feedback loop is not going to result in a natural reverb. So here is Galactic, the capacity for weird sustaining spaces or things that evolve by feeding small amounts of new stuff in, taking it off of this longness setting of 1, which is infinite reverb, And we can manipulate this as we go. So it becomes an instrument. And of course, darkness still works. Weirdly, that seemed to affect the feedback loop. That's a little weird. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Darkness is making what's sitting in there settle down. That is somewhat mysterious to me. I'm not sure why it's doing that. It's acting like that's in the feedback path. I bet I know why. I bet I can make that stop. So, low pass. Moving that multiply up there. Let's make this all one line just because it's all about the same stuff. I can do that calculation later. Period delay that applies vibrato. Let's find everywhere that we mentioned low pass. It shouldn't be inside this. All right, this is somewhat mysterious. It's just doing a thing. You're quite welcome, folks. So yeah, I'm not quite getting why it's doing what it's doing. I got my initial filter. This should be the reverb tank, including the feedback stuff. And it should be able to go all the way back to bright again. A little quick final. Delete. So we're not filtering on the output. What happens? I need to call it a day pretty soon. Let's see. That's affecting the loop. Why is that affecting the loop? got our input sample coming in here. The stuff is happening. There's our input sample there. That should take out all the filtering. If it doesn't, something else is going on. Yeah, you hear that? I do darkness and stuff starts becoming dark even though I thought I had taken away all the filtering. That's going to be slider 3. So I've taken the filters out. This shouldn't affect anything. And yet it totally does. So why? Why is that doing? Because it's affecting interpolate. Where's that happening? Why is that happening? Edit all in scope. Apparently because we're doing a one sample blur factor on literally every feedback note rather than just leaving it alone. Interesting. Okay, so we didn't actually want that. This is our space reverb, so it kind of needs to cling to whatever was in it. So this no longer fits with our goals here. That was part of what lived in the other plugin. This is not the same kind of plugin. We don't want that. So we're going to zoom in. Take out these previous's because we're only using feedback. I didn't do that entirely here, so I need to go and find where that was. Nope, I did. It was all sitting under there. We're going to take out interpolate. Notice how I snuck the golden ratio in there? We can put that in there. Because those will be fine. And we're going to take out all of this. Here's what was doing it. That is literally taking the feedback and blending it slightly with the previous one, and then it's a continuing factor. So now and then I'm going to bail right out of here immediately after demonstrating this. Oh geez, 20 or so years maybe I've been doing that. And because I do have something to do at 2, and it's basically 2. Now if I do darkness, comes back. That's what I was shooting for. So there's a space for you. And that's without even using the full size. This is now full size. There we go. Galactic. And that's good and wide too. You can't hear it, but it is. Here's your space plugin. And that ought to do. There we go. I think that's a useful pile of work. Now I will bid you all a good day. Later.